Hi everyone, I'm Yuvika from RC by Price Labs and welcome again to our founder series. Today's episode is about what it takes to build something from scratch. And I'm not just talking about a company, but an entirely new category. I'm joined by David Ciccarelli from Lake.com. He's the CEO of Lake.com and he's trying to do something bold. He's building the go-to marketplace for lakefront travel, powered by AI visibility and deep niche focus.
Welcome to RSU by Price Labs weekly podcast. Subscribe now.
So without further ado, let's go to David. Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm so excited that you're on here because your company has been making waves lately. We know we've been hearing a lot about Lake.com at conferences and industry news. So it is really exciting to meet you today. Why don't you share a little bit about who you are, where you come from, how did you find yourself in short-term rentals, for instance?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Prior to this, I exited another tech startup that I built for 15 years with my dear wife, Stephanie, in a completely different industry. And we ultimately sold and exited to a private equity firm. And through that process, we had the blessing to be able to purchase a lake house of our own, which we enjoyed with family and invited them up to what we call a cottage here in Canada. And so that place was just north of Toronto in an area called Muskoka. And it's a really beautiful location. And as I invited friends and family, we even hosted a few couple of family reunions. And as much as we tried to have as many people to our place, we found ourselves needing to find other places for them to stay. And of course, we went on the big OTAs, the legacy players, and you would think that they would have all the inventory locked up and available, but we really didn't find anything either that close to us or that kind of met the needs in terms of amenities. And the closest hotel, and now granted it was peak season, but it was between $700 and $800 a night, which was just not going to fit the budget for the size of group that we had. And so that really led us to try to solve our own problem. What if Stephanie and I could take our years of experience in building online marketplaces and transfer that knowledge into a new industry? And so we looked at travel and specifically vacation rentals as we saw this need firsthand. There seemed to be all these beautiful properties on the water, yet the inventory wasn't coming online. And why was that? And we spoke with the local trades, kind of boots on the ground, plumbers, horticulturalists, and asked them, do the homeowners come out here? And they said, it's a real shame. We maintain these properties year round. They might come for a week or two out of the year and they just go empty. Now, perhaps they're wealthy or well off that they don't need to rent them out. But I've heard enough stories from people that say it's too bad. We wanted to keep the property in our family and pass it down generation to generation, but due to property taxes or just maintenance, they ended up having to sell it. And so this is an opportunity for us to help them meet the needs, those practical needs of keeping the property in the family and having that legacy kind of be passed down of enjoying time by the water with family, as well as providing those accommodations for travelers who get to experience the great outdoors.
That is really exciting. And also, it's always interesting to hear when a person experiences what leads to the start of an entire business. And you've chosen a specific niche. Obviously, it doesn't come without its challenges. To develop that niche, lakefront stays within 15 minutes of water, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, that's right. You wanted to find one little slice of the world that we felt that we had firsthand knowledge of. Stephanie grew up on Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes here in North America, and I grew up on Lake Superior, the largest of the Great Lakes. So we had time it was very much cultural to spend our summers by the water. So we had that firsthand knowledge. I think is important as entrepreneurs plot a course or founders think about how do I apply my real life experience into the business. And the way that translates is, okay, well, we genuinely know our customer. They're people kind of like us. That's the first one. Then when you're writing about for your audience, you can write personal stories of traveling, road trips, going fishing, going boating, hosting people at your property. These are all things that we've done and translate in our writing. And I think it comes across as more of an authentic story as opposed to something that we might have read about online or maybe have read about in a book or heard on a podcast. This is us living and breathing it each year.
It really does make all the difference, that first-hand experience. How would you say that into what Lake.com looks like today? How that experience translates to someone who comes to Lake.com for the first time?
Well, the first thing is that speaking of experiences, we actually wanted to pick a name that was representative, ultimately a consumer-facing brand. And we actually looked at, because a lot of people ask, wow, you got lake.com. That's a short URL. It's pretty good domain. And we knew the importance of building a brand and the name being synonymous with the category. And I love that you brought up the word category because the leaders in any space create categories. They are not just another business within the space. So, owning short-term rentals there's lots of big players doing that. But what if we could own a category within that or a subcategory, if you will? So that's why we looked at lake house and lake houses, lake homes. We looked at restful and restfully and just felt it kind of lacked the energy. But lake allowed us to create a brand that might start in vacation rentals. And the long-term vision could be to add on, those other experiences, boat rentals, kayaks, sea-doos and ski-doos, all the other things that happen by the water. And so today we're starting in vacation rentals. There's 40,000 properties around the world, and we're excited to be bringing on new partners of property managers. But the first couple years, the biggest challenge was in running a two-sided marketplace is you need the supply, right? All the available inventory of properties. And to bring them on, our initial hypothesis was, oh, well, we'll build it and individual homeowners would come and sign on the website. And it turned out that 95% of the people signing up were, of course, those of you listening to the podcast and video today, which are property managers. And of course, property managers use a PMS or a property management system. So that was the task in the first couple of years, really the first 18 months. We've been in business for 2 years, but the first 18 months was identifying the property management systems, building those commercial relationships first, and then actually developing that integration. And even once the integration is done, then there's this whole second wave of actually marketing and communicating to people that thanks for your interest, we finally got that connection with Hostaway or Hostfully or OwnerRes and Lodgify we just announced recently as well. That was the mountain that we needed to climb in those first couple months. And now it means that there's enough properties and enough of these beautiful lakes around the world that we can be ramping up that marketing to the traveler and bringing them onto the platform.
That's interesting to hear. And where would you say are your largest markets at the moment? And where are you looking to expand to? What's your next one?
Well, surprisingly, the largest markets are actually where there's the greatest concentration of properties is actually across Europe. We do have a partnership with Interhome, which is a large property manager, as I'm sure you're familiar with in Europe, who was recently acquired by Home to Go. So they have a massive inventory of 30 plus thousand properties. So that was a big boost to us. And there are, of course, properties by rivers, coastal properties, as well as several of the lakes like Lake Garda or Lake Como, a lot of near kind of hot springs in Croatia, just really following that water theme. So Europe is the largest by concentration of properties, but throughout North America, the natural destinations would be around the Great Lakes. Usually they're driving out of the city, go experience the outdoors with family and friends.
Which aligns very neatly with that traditional vacation rental market, sort of the makeup of that market, but connecting these property managers and their wonderful properties with this guest that you know. And I know that AI has been a huge part of your journey in accomplishing that.
Let's talk about the marketing first of how we're getting visibility for lake.com and by extension, all of the properties managed by property managers. I call it enhancing or augmenting the property description with other attributes, either because we can see them in the photos or because we know the lake itself. And so some things that have worked for us was schema markup to all of our pages. So schema markup is, think of it as like invisible code. People don't see it, but it's like machine read code that creates some structure around things like we have a destination page. Okay, the destination is the name of a city, it's within a province or a state, and then it's within a country. Are there points of interest? So you tag things specifically as points of interest. We add all of this, latitude and longitude, all this schema markup to all of our 7,000 destination pages. Now, how did we build that? Well, we've done it with a massive spreadsheet where we query OpenAI's API. So using ChatGPT to fill in some of those blanks. So we're not manually copying and pasting the latitude and longitude of every city or lake that we have as a destination. So we're, kind of building that database with known facts. So that's one thing that has worked really well for us, as well as adding FAQs to each of those destination pages, answering questions. Sometimes people refer to this approach, it used to be SEO, which is still a major marketing tactic, but some people refer to the new way as AEO, answer engine optimization. By formatting some of the content on your page, the most common one being an FAQ block, writing frequently asked questions, things that people would actually say. Now, where do you get these questions from? Yes, there's tools like alsoask.com or Google's People Also Ask feature, but I like to apply a technique called jobs to be done. The way you think about this is, what are the tasks or jobs to be done across the buyer's journey or the traveler's journey in this case, that when they land on a page, they probably have specific questions when visiting a city or a lake or a national or state park. Things like, what are the most common points of interest or top attractions? If it's a lake, can I fish in this lake? What kind of fish are available? Is it safe for swimming? So all of these just very practical traveler questions that go from inspiration all the way through to, confirming the details of the booking. We include kind of 5 to 7 those types of questions on those destination pages that are often generated or at least inspired by ChatGPT is kind of the tool of choice for these types. But this is like, our thinking goes into it of like what kinds of questions to ask. And we're always eyes on to when the answer is, correct, that there's no odd formatting. So those are a couple ways where it's worked very well. One, I'll say where it hasn't worked, if you embrace that too much and you're not looking at, again, just using this example of FAQs, the answer that's being generated, sometimes you can get these odd artifacts. And I'm talking like it'll outright say the word error, or it will say data not found. If you were just to publish that blindly, somebody were to open up that FAQ, they might see the question and then they try to read the answer and it says error. So that would throw them off. This is why it's so important to have what some people call the human in the loop, right? That person in the process, that editorial process before publishing. So that's the way that we've leveraged the tools from a marketing perspective, and how we've actually, where it hasn't. And if I could share one more area where we're using AI, is actually in the discovery of properties. So we're running 2 parallel paths right now. The first one is building a, booking assistant on the site that is much more kind of conversational converse. Traditionally, every OTA has a, search box that is, where do you want to go, when do you want to go, and who's going, right? Those 3 questions. You look at any site. So how can we make that much more conversational so someone's not hunting and pecking through those 3 questions, but also dozens of filters afterwards to find the right place? And the average number of words that someone's putting into a chat interface is about 40 to 50. So they're long queries. Sometimes they're shorter, but people almost describe their whole trip and all of their needs. That's one thing that we are trying to take, that kind of go from fields that people input and search and make that into a chat interface that can then display some properties directly within the chat interface. So we're building that on Lake, but we also have a prototype in development mode. OpenAI doesn't let you publish these apps as of yet, but I think that's coming soon, hopefully in first quarter of 2026. So we're building that same experience directly on OpenAI so that we can be competitive with those who have already gotten a bit of a head start, namely Booking and Expedia have apps within ChatGPT. So we want to be right there with them and be able to offer those lakefront properties to those that are looking for them.
It's always really interesting to see real world cases. And thank you so much for sharing in detail the steps that you're taking and the thinking behind it, because I think it's super helpful for others who can take inspiration, at least understand even the concept, creating the concept. We talked about the transition, how people search for travel inspiration. This is something we've actually had a series of videos where I've been testing out various AI tools. Claims are typically bigger than the reality of things, and that's just where we are in the moment in technology. But one constant I've also noticed is this need to search in natural language wherever you are. This behavior is already among people versus looking at maybe five filters on choose your city, destination, choose the date. Instead, I just want to say, can you find me somewhere safe for five people, two children under six for these days? So I would like to hear if that's something that you are looking to integrate on Make.com and what you think about how people use this sort of technology to be inspired.
Well, the first step is to actually have the content on your website. ChatGPT or Google AI mode require to have that content and referencing your brand associated with that content in their large language model, right? In their LLM, which is, you can think of it like a large database of all the content, humanities knowledge put together. Now, they only update that large language model every year or so, perhaps more frequently on some subsets of data. But let's just go with, if they update it every year, well, then how do they get new and current information? So the first pass is we put in this large, complex requests for travel inspiration. They're going to go first look at known information within their large language model. If they can't find something that's sufficient, then the next step is what's referred to as a query fan out. Basically, they take your big prompt, break it down into a series of questions, and search through retrieval augmented generation, meaning they're going to go out on the open web and search and run all of these search queries to find new and current information. And so you need to have the content on your website. It's not going to connect the dots for you unless it exists in the first place. And ideally, you've done this years ago, which is why established brands do have the benefit because they're baked in already to that large language model. Failing that, especially for event-driven content or where something's changing, okay, great. You can get some visibility on that second stage where it goes out. So from a marketing standpoint, content is still going to, rule the world, if you will. And I think that's a really critical key part of it. The properties, if you're marketing properties, if you have that ability to describe them slightly differently for each of the channels that you're publishing them on, or maybe a certain channel has attributes or amenities that aren't on other channels, differentiate. Yes, it's ultimately the same property, but differentiate them enough so that you're getting kind of, I think of them as like flags planted in the ground. You're claiming more territory within the digital sphere for your properties that ultimately you want to have booked. So that's how the content for many property managers are the property descriptions, those pages, which includes the photos, the title, the descriptions, and all the amenities, and even right down to the house rules. Just speaking with someone yesterday, how they were describing that they were looking to travel with their dog, but their dog weighs 130 pounds. Well, not too many properties managers would just say the weight category. They might say it's pet friendly, but nobody wants to bring a 130-pound dog to a property to discover that that exceeds some limit. So the more specific you can be, right down to the house rules and what your expectations are, all of that is going to be consumed and ingested by these new AI search tools and ultimately displayed to people that are looking for both travel inspiration, help them make that decision and compare and contrast, and then ultimately make the booking.
This is such an important point you make because I have noticed there's a lot of fatigue around the idea of creating content because there's this assumption that, oh, everyone's using ChatGPT or Perplexity to look for whatever they were looking for. So why do I need to create content if everyone's going to go ChatGPT anyway? But failing to factor in that the content comes from somewhere and there's this opportunity for your content to be discovered from an entirely new mode in a way. So
Mm.
yes, people are using Google a bit less and they want to ask questions with ease on ChatGPT and Google has AI mode now too, like you mentioned, but they want, when they look for something, they want to find it and you can be what they find. So that's a really important point you did bring up. Thanks for sharing that. Just switching modes a little bit, it's been really interesting to hear about how you're using tech, what challenges you've already run into and how you've overcome them. What I would like to talk about is what is next for Lake.com. What are your goals in the next year, 2 years? Where do you see Lake.com going? What does success look like to you?
Well, our goals are to continue. I think about it kind of twofold to continue to build the supply, right? We want to be bringing on new partners. So if you are an owner of a vacation rental or property manager of properties by the water, we would love to bring you onto lake.com. There's no cost to you, and we charge a 10% transaction fee up when there's a booking, right? So we call that shared success. We only make money when you make money. And so our incentives are aligned. So we would love to welcome your properties by the water on lake.com. In order to do so, though, of course, we need to work with your property management system. So on deck, we have about a half dozen property management systems or channel managers that are in the works, various kind of stages of the pipeline, but that's an important part to add on to the half dozen that we already have. For the guests that are traveling, the marketing efforts are really kind of ramping up here as well too. Predominantly on search, we're included in a meta search for Google Vacation Rentals as well too to get visibility there for our properties. So these are the kinds of activities, and of course, continuing to market through AI search channels. And I'm looking forward most to let's see what, ChatGPT does when they enable commerce to happen. It's a very limited beta, I feel like right now, or kind of pilot program. But when they enable people who are developing these apps behind the scenes to actually publish them, I think there's going to be, a big surge of activity, just like it's going on 15 or so years ago now. When the iPhone first launched, many people don't recall, but there were no apps on the iPhone. Apple controlled all of the apps. And then the breakthrough was when they opened up this SDK, the software development kit, where anybody could create an app. And when they did that, that's when it completely took off. It took over BlackBerry. It was by far the biggest advancement, was welcoming on third-party developers. I think OpenAI and Google will do that for kind of built-in apps directly within their AI surfaces. So that's something I'm really looking forward to next year.
You paint quite a picture. I'm excited to see that happen too. Obviously excited to see how differently everybody uses it as well to their advantage. Thank you so much for sharing that, David. Speaking of vacation rental managers who may want to join you, how do they find you? Where do they find you? How do they get in touch with the lake.com?
Yeah, the best way is just to go to the website, lake.com. You can sign up for free, either with your Google account in one click or with your email there. And then if you use a property management system, which I'm guessing most of you do, then you can just hover over the menu to see the integrations. And we have all of them there. It's literally a one-click integration. So you can do it on lake.com, in which will connect you that way, or you'll be on your PMS of choice, and there'll be a link where you can connect from that marketplace there. So either direction works, but starting on lake.com, making sure you have an account there is a great place to get going.
Good. And before we end for the day, are there any words you want to share? Any final thoughts?
I think this is such an inspiring moment in time, both technologically as well as a number of mega events that we have to look forward to next year. We have the Olympics just around the corner, then we have World Cup. So it's an industry that is event driven. There's